All right, so this is the last of our 5 or 6 week series where we've been sort of exploring 2 different ways of thinking about our journey and sort of framing that journey, thinking about where we are in our life with God. For the last couple of weeks, we've been in some material from Henry Nouwen in a book called Spiritual Formation, where he lists these 7 movements or polarities or tensions that we deal with in different seasons of our life. I hope that no one is dealing with all 7 of these at once. That would be a pretty tough season of life. But it's likely that in this season of your life, you are dealing with 1 or 2 of these tensions. And so if one of the ones that we covered doesn't resonate with you, perhaps another one will. I've been trying to think of different ways of framing this material by now, and so let me offer this one tonight as we finish things up. So you might think of the image of fixing a flat. So imagine that you're using your car, you're going on a multi-day journey, and you wake up in the middle of that journey, and you've got to get to Albuquerque, New Mexico by the end of the day, but eventually you're trying to get to Los Angeles. But all you're trying to do for the next step is get to Albuquerque. But you walk out of the Motel 6 and there's a flat tire on your car that is going to hinder your progress for that day. That should be that day. And so the question is, well, what has caused that flat? And what do I need to do to fix that flat so that I can get on the road and make some progress? So if we use that image, I think here's how Nouwen's material sort of fits in here. That Nouwen would say that, well, if you want to make some forward progress in whatever season of life you're in, you'll probably have to address at least 1 of 7 potential flats that are hindering your progress. So you probably don't have all 4 tires flat, maybe just 1 tire flat. And it's in his mind, it's going to be one of these 7 issues that have caused the flat and that are hindering your progress. So not using his language, but trying to put it in more regular language. Here's one way of thinking about it. So one of the flats might be, well, I can't see what God's up to in this season of my life. That move from opaqueness to transparency, and the inability that we have in this season to really see what God's up to is making it difficult for us to move forward. Or the second one, I can't get control of blank. If there's something going on in our life where we want control, we just can't seem to get control of it. So this is what he calls the move from illusion to prayer, the need to surrender control. Or maybe in this season of your life, you're at a place where you're saying, well, I've just suffered a loss. I've suffered the loss of ABC, and it's that loss that's really making it difficult for you to make some progress in your spiritual life. The move from sorrow to joy, or maybe resentment or bitterness. I'm bitter at, put a person's name in there, or an institution's name, or I'm bitter about an issue or a topic. His Nouwen's language would be the move from resentment to gratitude. Or number 5, maybe in this season of your life, you're dealing with some kind of fear. So you would say, well, I'm afraid in this season of my life, I'm afraid of some person, some issue, some consequence. And dealing with that fear, the move from fear to love, is Nouwen's language. Or the 6th one, I'm in a season of my life when I'm rejecting others. I'm pushing people away. I'm causing division and creating conflict, and that just seems to be what I'm doing right now. Nouwen calls this the move from exclusion to inclusion. And then the final one, maybe you're in a season of life where you're distressed about death. I mean, We have these national tragedies that we endure, and the specter of death becomes all the more real. So now it calls this the move from denying death to befriending death. So you're probably not dealing with all of those, but in any season of life, one of those has flattened your tire and making it difficult to move forward. And in order to move forward, you're going to have to address that issue. So we, in the last few weeks, we've done 1, 2, 3, 4, and now we're doing 5, 6, and 7 to finish things out. So like we did last week, I will read some quotes about this move from Nouwen's book. We'll look at some scriptures that seem to fit in with that move, and then we'll stop for discussion about that move. So we'll do that for 5, 6, and 7. All right. So now on fear. So we're on move 5, the move from fear to love, the move from fear to love. Some of the things he says about fear. The more people I come to know, and the more I come to know people, the more I am overwhelmed by the negative power of fear. It often seems that fear has so invaded every part of our lives that we no longer know what a life without fear would feel like. Fear pervades our bodies, individually and communally. So many people let their thinking, speaking, and acting be motivated by fear. We fear for ourselves and fear for our neighbors. We fear that something terrible may happen. There always seems to be something to fear, something within us or around us, something close or far away, something visible or invisible, something in ourselves and others or in God. And then in terms of love, Nouwen writes, when St. John so beautifully says that perfect love drives out fear, he points to a divine love that comes from God. The perfect love that drives out all fear is the divine love in which we are invited to participate as we learn to dwell in intimacy with the author of love. The reassuring voice which repeats over and over again, do not be afraid, have no fear, is the voice we most need to hear. The voice ordering these words, fear not, sound all through history as the voice of God's messengers, be they angels or saints, and of Christ himself. It is the voice that announces a whole new way of being, a way of living in the house of love, the house of the Lord. The challenge is to let go of fear and claim the deeper truth of who I am. When you forget your true identity as a beloved child of God, you lose your way in life. You become scared and start doing things not freely, but because of fear. Moving from the house of fear to the house of love is necessary, not just for each of us individually, but for the survival of the human family. If we continue to focus on our many fears, our fear of terrorists, or fear of socialism, or fear of no longer being the strongest and wealthiest nation on earth, and many smaller fears to justify spending more time, money, and energy to build more devastating weapons, our planet will have little chance of surviving past our lifetimes. The house of the Lord is the house of love for all people. There is a circle of safety, intimacy, and hospitality in the house of love. So a few scriptures, 1 John 4:18, which he quotes from, there is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. Romans 8, for all who are led by the Spirit of God are sons of God. For you did not receive the spirit of slavery to fall back into fear, but you've received the spirit of adoption as sons, by whom we cry, Abba, Father. Hebrews 13, so we can confidently say, the Lord is my helper, I will not fear. What can man do to me? And 1 Timothy 1, for this reason, I remind you to fan into flame the gift of God, which is in you through the laying on of my hands. For God gives a spirit not of fear, but of power and love and self-control. So the move from fear to love. All right, so let's stop and let's talk about that for a moment here. Hello, Laconia.
Hello, everybody. I just got in.
All right, so here are some discussion questions for this move, the move from fear to love. Why might a list of top 7 movements, so that's what we've got here, Noun's list of, he's saying these are the top 7 things that we need to pay attention to. So why do you think a move from fear to love might make that list? Or maybe you'd want to argue that it shouldn't be in the list. So that'd be one question. Another question would be, can you share an example of how fear seems to dictate conversation and behavior in the wider world?
Yes.
And or number 3, what fears operate in your own life? Or number 4, in what way does love cast out fear? So any of those 4 questions or anything else that kind of stirs in you as we think about the move from fear to love. So I'll open it up there.
I'm struck to the response to the shooting in Texas, how fearful gun people are.
Hmm.
And I hadn't probably quite noticed that before. I almost felt bad for them. I mean, that they couldn't even pause to mourn the 21 deaths. They were just immediately into, someone's going to take my guns.
Hmm.
I'm saying, I don't know who that would be. I've never met that person, but you guys are terrified.
Hmm.
And it comes across as sad. It's so deep, it's irrational, but it's also really sad. I mean, could we just pause for 24 hours and warn these people? But that wasn't what was happening. Even on your Facebook post, just, I mean, wow, are you wired tight? My goodness.
Yeah. So a lot of the conversation going on right now is motivated by fear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
You think the fear would be for the safety of the children?
Hmm.
That would seem a natural one, but the stronger fear is someone's going to take my guns.
Hmm.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I think the last, 2.5 years with COVID is just fears there all the time.
Mhm.
We, even people we love, we have to kind of stand back, and we've had moments where we're fearful of each other, our, contact with each other.
Mhm.
So it's something we've dealt with consistently for a long time now.
Mhm. Yeah. It's interesting. My mom has finally opened up a little bit more about her own fears around COVID, and they went to see my brother's middle son's graduation from college last week, and she had a little panic attack at a Macy's. It's not something she would have done pre-COVID, but yeah. How does love cast out fear?
Chris, I think when I look actually at questions 3 and 4, I see them being somewhat connected. When I think of my own fears or fears that I think I see in the world, there's a drawing back, there's a drawing away from the center. There's sort of like move 6, there's this exclusion, whether I think I'm seeing groups excluding groups or individuals excluding individuals, or I feel a need to exclude myself from something. something, or I am excluding myself from something. But when you embrace love, it turns you around. It turns it around. It turns the focus around. It turns it towards inclusion. It turns it toward a willingness to get in the game, to get in the mind of, to get in the life of, to get in the shoes of. And I just see how, if I have to connect two movements, I really see that connection between 5 and 6 very, very strongly. So love casts out fear by getting in there, by taking an action and getting in there to not allow fear to rule, because something's greater than that fear. It allows you to proceed forward or proceed back into. So it's a way of kind of being vulnerable and getting dirty, but in the name of knowing that there's a reason, there's a spirituality, there's a higher calling, there's a higher energy. And it doesn't come easily unless you feel love. Love is that makes that happen with a sense of comfort almost, or purpose, or courage. So.
That's good. That's a good insight, Amy. Thank you.
I think in a lot of ways, I mean, fear is when you just don't know what's going to happen. And so it's about what you expect could happen. I mean, you can be fearful in the moment, but generally speaking, it's because you just don't know what's going to happen. And the only way, to lose some fear is to have some trust that good can still be done, regardless of the worst possible outcomes. And so love drives that out, because we know that God can be trusted, that God is good. And, most of the time you learn this through experiences.
Yeah.
Right? So that would be my take on that.
Yeah. So love allows us to experience trust and faith in a God who's somehow going to be at work through whatever it is that we're afraid of. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on to move 6, to move from exclusion to inclusion. Excuse me. So now on exclusion. Often he says it's difficult to love and include those who do not seem to fit our opinions of the righteous or meet our expectations of good behavior. When our hearts are filled with prejudices, worries, and fears, there is little room for a stranger. Real hospitality is not exclusive, but inclusive. Requires a radical openness and creates space for a wide range of human experience. Inclusion. There, in a momentary experience of solidarity with the whole human race, we too may witness many walls and boundaries come tumbling down, including distinctions between minister and lay persons, caregiver and care receiver, client or helper, male or female, young or old, married or celibate, white or person of color, homosexual or heterosexual. We need not make comparisons and judgments about others. I'm not like him or her or them. I am more, I am better, I am different from the others. On a deeper level, we can realize our common humanity. In the light of God's unconditional love and our own belovedness, we may experience our hearts expanding as if there are no limits. On the original cross of Jesus, we're told the vertical and horizontal beams were of equal length. You can draw a perfect circle around the cross beams. The horizontal beam points left toward the Jewish people, the right toward Gentiles. The vertical beam points toward God above and then to the earth below. This is the mystery and promise of the cross. The cross beams grounded on the mountain where Jesus brings all divergent points together into one circle of God's great love. I think that's a helpful image there. All right, some scriptures. We could read the entire Bible on this one. But Genesis 4, in the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel also brought of the firstborn of his flock and of their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering he had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his face fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry, and why is your face fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is contrary to you, but you must rule over it." Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. So we don't get very far into the narrative of Scripture before we get to a radical and tragic experience of exclusion here, and family exclusion here. Genesis 1:27, so God created man in his own image, in the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. That sense that all of humanity is made in the image of God, and therefore inclusion becomes possible and necessary. Paul's note in Ephesians 2, talking about God bringing together Jew and Gentile, for he himself, Jesus, he himself is our peace, who has made us both one and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, exclusion, by abolishing the law of commandments expressed in ordinances, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, inclusion, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And James 2, from a couple weeks ago on Sunday morning, my brothers, show no partiality as you hold the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory. Those negative snap judgments about others based on externals that lead to exclusion. Okay, so I'm sorry, I meant to bring that back so you can see it. Now we're to discussion. Okay. So some discussion questions here on move 6, exclusion to inclusion. So here we are, now on the list of seven of the most important things that we need to deal with in our spiritual life. Why would this move merit a spot? Why should it be on the list of 7? Another question would be, what forms does exclusion take in our culture and world? Number 3, what form does exclusion take in your own life? Or 4, what helps motivate you toward inclusion? Or 5, who modeled inclusion in your own life? So any of those questions.
I have a question that is not one of those questions.
Okay.
Going back to a quote from Nowen, and he says, on the original cross of Jesus, we are told the vertical and the horizontal beams were of equal lengths. I never have been told that before, so he seems like that's a known fact.
No,
Okay.
I think he's treating it as such, and
Okay.
I think he's probably borrowing from some mystical writings
Oh,
reflecting on the cross.
Okay, I was getting hung up there.
Yeah. We'll give him some
I'll give him
latitude on
some
that
latitude
one.
there. Okay,
Yeah,
gotcha.
be inclusive of that one.
Okay. Okay.
So why would this move merit a spot on the list of 7? What exclusion do you see in the world around you or in your own life? What motivates you to be inclusive? And who models inclusion in your life?
Well, you think now I wrote this more recently. Probably wrote this, 10 years ago, or I don't know, when he was still living and writing.
Yeah. Mhm.
But if you thought there was exclusion in America, when we wrote this, wow.
Mhm.
Because all we're doing anymore is like you put your finger up and say, this is what I believe, and everything, but there's like the wave has just divided, and you got to figure out where everybody is.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, you can hardly bring up any topic without finding, okay, you're in this camp and you're in that camp.
Yeah. So if anything, our culture has moved
Mhm,
more towards exclusion
mhm,
and thus requiring this move to be
Yeah.
dealt with
mhm.
again and again and again.
And I guess exclusion kind of accompanied with or undergirded by intolerance.
Mr. Dunn.
Chris?
Yeah, Art.
Yeah, I don't mind spicing it up a little bit. With regards to exclusion, I'm sorry to report, I think, and I'm not speaking specifically about any specific, but I think churches exclude. And what I mean by that is there's just so many of them. Where we lived in Bridgeport, within 100 yards, there was 4 churches. And I bet within those walls, they were discussing inclusion. We were in Nashville past weekend, and there were dozens upon dozens of churches, elbow to elbow. And I bet they were discussing inclusion within those walls. So I'm like a bit confused by that. And I don't know if the word is exclusion, but it doesn't seem that inclusive.
Good point. Yeah. We don't seem to model inclusion as the
Yeah, I'm
body.
not sure. I'm just not sure. I mean, brick and mortar suggests that it's not inclusive because they're separate. They're like the little fight domes or little tents and little enclaves of inclusive discussions and thinking. And my comment's not directed at any specific spot. It's just a
Observation.
reflection, an observation of what exists.
Yeah.
Chris,
Yes, Sylvia.
today you sent out something from the Interfaith Council,
Yes.
and that makes me feel a little more inclusive
Mhm.
because I looked at that bottom of all the people, you're one of them, you're an advisor, and I'm sure they are all from a different, it's probably, it looks like one is Muslim maybe. And
Right. Christian
I don't
Jewish.
know. Yeah, I felt like that is a little bit of a help towards inclusiveness, I think.
Yeah, I'm
When you see all those people working together, that's a little
Yes.
bit, gives you hope.
Yeah, I'm really encouraged by that. I've not, this is the first time in my life where I've lived in an area where there's an interfaith group that's active, that exists, that's active, and
Right.
that seems to actually get along.
Right. Well, I've been in places where my minister would never have even dreamed of doing that, being part of that. But
Yeah.
I can remember one time we had a group at Stanford, and I mean, all different faiths prayed that night. And I can't remember what we were praying about. I think it was something in Africa, but it was just it just felt so hopeful to me to see all those people agreeing on at least that one thing that night. I thought
Yeah.
that was very encouraging.
Mhm. Yeah. Jane?
Just confirm, especially what Sylvia just said. I've been really, really blessed in my life to have had many experiences from a relatively early time where I would use the term, ecumenical in terms of just within the Christian community. We have such diversity. And I think coming out of our tradition, my part of our tradition at least, we always saw that as something really evil. And I'm not saying I think it's a good thing, but another way to look at it is, the Presbyterians, and our roots are Presbyterian, do decently in order. The Episcopalians do grace. The Methodists do spirituality and prayer and hymnody. And we have all these great traditions that each have a kind of a different facet of the expression of faith that they bring to the larger Christian community. And if we can just step outside and become a part of some of those communities, and then, you take that to interfaith and it goes another step further. I think we've been taught, and I was taught at least, to be so fearful that if I talked to someone who believed even slightly differently than I did, that I was at risk of just, kind of losing everything. And I have not found that to be true. I have found those conversations so enriching and contributing to my faith, and particularly to my understanding of being church and being church together. So
Yeah.
I just, I know I've been blessed, as I said, to have had those opportunities, but it's out there, folks. There are people who want to walk together hand in hand, even though they may be Baptists or Methodists or Episcopalians or Presbyterians or Catholics or whatever else. We have more in common than we have that divides us.
Yes, that's right. Thank you, Jane. Annie?
In terms of why does this move merit a spot? I sort of think of the message of Christ to be one of inclusion. So I leave that on the table. But when I think about the difference between exclusion and inclusion, exclusion is when you allow individuals to sort of come within your group, but there's a sense of conformity. There needs to be a conformity to a certain idea or a certain set of standards or rules. Inclusion, there's no requirement of conformity. And in fact, maybe, I don't know if it's the opposite, but it's the requirement of, we want you to bring you and the things that make up you, the uniquenesses of you, and work and put that together toward a common goal. So you can come together in an exclusive way towards a common goal, but I think it's that concept of what are you valuing from the individual, and are you valuing the individual brings? And I think that, again, is the message of Christ. We're valuing the person for what that person brings at that moment, and any moment previously, and any moment that is to come of that person. And I think that's the biggest difference.
Nice, thank you. All right, let's move on, and we'll take the last 10 minutes here to do the last move. Okay, so move 7, denying death to befriending death. So we'll end on a real positive note here. Denying death to befriending death. So on denying from now on, if we start thinking about death only when we're terminally ill, our reflections will not give us the support we need as death draws near. As the German mystic Jacob Boehme once said, "Who dies not before he dies is ruined when he dies." Our fear of illness, death, and the future takes away our freedom and gives our society the power to manipulate us with threats and promises. When we reach beyond our fears to the one who loves us with an everlasting love, then oppression, persecution, and even death are unable to control us. All forms of evil, illness, and death lose their final power over us. And befriending, I deeply believe that when we become lovers of life and death, when we embrace our enemy, when we befriend our mortality, we can become better warriors and stronger resistors through the power of love. Once we relate to death as a familiar friend instead of a threatening enemy, we will be able to shed many doubts and fears, face our own mortality, and live in the freedom and knowledge that we are God's beloved sons and daughters. We come to the deep inner knowledge, a knowledge of the heart more than of the mind, that we are born out of love and will die into love, that every part of our being is deeply rooted in love, and that nothing can separate us from this love. The final movement in the spiritual life requires radical trust in the one who loved us before our birth and will be with us after our death. Okay, some scriptures. Romans 6, now if we've died with Christ, we believe that we will also live with him. We know that Christ, being raised from the dead, will never die again. Death no longer has dominion over him. Romans 8, for I'm sure that neither death nor life, nor angels nor rulers, nor things present nor things to come, nor powers, nor height nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God that is in Christ Jesus our Lord. 1 Corinthians 15, for this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. When the perishable puts on the imperishable, and the mortal puts on immortality, then shall come to pass the saying that is written, death is swallowed up in victory. O death, where is your victory? O death, where is your sting? Philippians 1, yes, and I will rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and the help of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, this will turn out for my deliverance, as it is my eager expectation and hope that I will not be at all ashamed, but that with full courage, now as always, Christ will be honored in my body, whether by life or by death. For me to live is Christ, and to die is gain. If I am to live in the flesh, that means fruitful labor for me. Yet which shall I choose? I cannot tell. I'm hard pressed between the two. My desire is to depart and be with Christ, for that is far better. But to remain in the flesh is more necessary on your account. Okay, so let's talk about that. We've got a list of the 7 most important things according to Nouwen. Why does a movement from denying death to befriending death, why does it merit being included on this list? Or in what ways does our fear of death, illness, and future take away our freedom, as he proposes? How does, he reframes death, so how do you find this to be helpful? We're born out of love and will die into love. Every part of our being is deeply rooted in love. So death is merely really a continuation of the companionship of love that we experience for all eternity. And what does it mean to you to befriend death? What does that mean to you to befriend death? All right, so let's talk about death.
I don't want to.
You're not denying it, you just don't want to.
Well, it sort of helps to have had a brush with it. And having had a brush with death, what we've just read here, I believe with all my heart, and I found freedom in befriending death and having confidence that that's just the step that precedes my returning home to my maker, and that is going to be a good day.
Yeah, so some life experience with death certainly makes this a little easier movement to.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
I think we get, it's hard because there's a spirit within us that wants to keep living.
Mhm.
For most of us, most of the time, there's just an energy of spirit. And I think that's, God given, that we are supposed to cling to life and try to make the most of life. But then there comes a time, either because of aging or because of illness or some experience, that you have to face that that's not the case any longer.
Mhm.
But so it's a big shift. So if death happens kind of naturally in the sense of aging, and you can kind of anticipate that this is likely to be your experience for the next few years, then it makes sense to be, to allow yourself to be prepared for that
Mhm.
and to think about it and to, like John says, kind of begin to embrace that, what is this next chapter going to look like and feel like? It will be glorious. But but I think it's hard for the people left behind when it comes quickly or unexpectedly, like the child's death. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. There's a sense of injustice
Yeah.
around
Yeah.
death. Yeah.
One of the things I find kind of fascinating is, I can be working with a client who is, tells me periodically that he thinks about death. He thinks about taking his life. And I don't know, he thinks life is not worth living. It's too hard, so why not end it? If he was told that his life was in danger, or if he was, facing a life-threatening diagnosis, he'd be scared.
Hmm.
Isn't that odd?
Yeah.
But but I don't think he's alone in that.
Mhm. Yeah. There's something almost primal in us that
Mhm.
wants to cling to life
Mhm.
in that moment.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I think about death a lot now, probably because I work at the hospital and I see it a lot. But I would say recently, I know as I near 70 years of age, it's not even that I'm thinking about my own death, but people in my life, people in the room there where you all are, people who are on Zoom right now. I've thought, what will life be like if I were to be the first one? What would life be like if one of my dear friends passed before? I think personally, one of the things that I've made a life goal is I want to die well. And partly because I've seen so many people at the hospital, many of whom claim faith in Jesus, who absolutely did not die well. And that scares the crap out of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Thank you, Laconia.
Yeah, I feel somewhere in between all these comments. I mean, I realized quite a long time ago that you can't really live as long as you fear death. You just, you have to,
Yep.
that the secret to being able to fully live is to not fear death. That being said, I have a different view of, say, my own death, which I don't really care about that much. I don't seem, it's just, maybe it's just my perspective at this point in life, but I don't fear my own death at all. I might fear the suffering that might come before the death. Now that's okay, but
Yeah.
I might fear that one. But of course, I do fear the death of my child, the death of, those close to me and everything. That's kind of a different thing, a shooting of elementary school, I'm of an age where I could have had a grandchild there or whatever. That it's completely different than fearing my own death, which, it's a completely different perspective there. And, but also I remember very vividly sitting in the back of the Stanford Church one time on the right and looking out, and it was it was a friend, we're having a funeral of somebody, that's like a relative of somebody at church, right? But I was looking around the room thinking, oh my gosh, I'm gonna have to go through all these people's funerals. That's a lot of funerals, but that's the way life is. You just look around and you realize, everybody's gonna die. And I'm gonna go to a lot of funerals, and we're all gonna, that's just the way life is. It just is. And I'm kind of with Laconia on that one, where I want to die well, or I want to encourage it in people.
It'd be really interesting to kind of tease that out a little bit more to, talk about what it looks like to die well.
Mom wants to add something. Go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, please.
At this point
Hey, Kathy, we can't hear.
Oh, I'm sorry.
yes, I'm going in my ear.
That's a little
I
better.
don't know if I can get her loud enough. Here, let me put this over here. Go ahead.
There you go.
Okay. At this point in life, I shouldn't be afraid of death, and I'm not fearful of death. I don't think about it very often because it isn't going. If I die, it isn't going to affect me. It's going to affect all of my loved ones around me. But
Yeah.
I hope that they will know that I'm not afraid to die, and that death, they may miss me, but they may also be glad I'm gone.
That's so Joanne.
Well, they know they're gonna be reunited with you, Joanne.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
All right, well, we're gonna let Joanne have the last word tonight.
Yeah.
So thank you, everybody, for taking this journey together with us over these Wednesday nights. Hopefully you have a little better sense of your own journey through this, and we look forward to Debbie taking the reins next Wednesday.
Thanks.
God bless you.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.